Hello everyone. Welcome again to Global Signs at Korea Business News. Today, we're going to have a really interesting talk with Mr. David Turbofield, at present life coach and also environmental consultant. Thank you again for joining us. David, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Bruce. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. So from June 2nd, the Singapore government ended the lockdown. Can you tell the viewers about the current corona situation there, please?
Yeah, the situation here is actually quite good. The cases that we're getting every day is probably somewhere between 300 to 400 at the moment, but that's coming down. They are predominantly within the migrant worker camps, the dormitories for the migrant workers. So we haven't seen a great deal of community transmission of late. So as a result of that, they have lifted the restrictions. What they were calling the circuit breaker, as you mentioned, that came out on the 1st or 2nd of June. So there is more activity going on. People are able to visit their parents in groups of 2. Factories are opening. Certain schools are starting to open. So we're starting to get back to a sense of normality.
Oh, very good news. Now, the Singapore government stated that they had implemented a firm and detailed policy regarding the end of the lockdown. What were Singaporeans' reaction to all this?
I think overwhelmingly positive. I mean, there have been a few kind of things here and there that they haven't been too happy with. There was an idea to have some wearable technology the government were testing out, and there was a rumor that that might be mandatory. People didn't like that, and there was a petition, and the government dropped that idea. But by and large, I think that the phased kind of easing of the lockdown, we're in phase 1 at the moment, phase 2, gets more back to normal, phase 3, gatherings to start to happen again. People are happy with that. I think the messaging here has been very clear. The guidance has been very clear. People know what they need to do, and there's been quite a lot of honesty, in my view, from the authorities, which has helped keep trust. So I think by and large, it's good. People trust the government here. They tend to be quite compliant, and it seems to have worked out quite well overall.
Okay, trust is very important. Now, the next question I think is the most interesting. Now, at present, you're a life coach. In Korea, Koreans don't really know what a life coach is. They're not familiar with the concept. Can you share with the viewers here what life coaching is all about?
Yeah, sure. It's a relatively new thing, not just in Korea, but in Asia in general. It's something that's well established in America and in Europe, really. I guess the way to describe life coaching would be that it's an opportunity to work with somebody in a safe space, in a confidential space, to take a good look at what you're up to. I don't know how that translates, but to kind of take a good look at what resources are available to you. How are you leaning into life? In what ways may you be stuck? What might be holding you back? How could you develop new resources for yourself to be able to lean into life kind of more joyfully, and to have more opportunity available to you. So it's a safe conversation, the sort of conversation that you can't have with your boss or with colleagues or with friends or family. You can talk about whatever you need to explore with a coach. And it enables people to be seen, to be heard, and to reflect upon themselves. So I think in a nutshell, you could kind of describe it like that.
Oh, I think we all need a life coach. I think we all need a life coach. Now, David, what are people complaining about the most since the corona outbreak? What changes did corona make to people's daily life? And do you think that the lockdown is an opportunity for people to develop both spiritually, mentally, physically?
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting question. The pandemic has shown up in all kinds of ways. I guess there are 3 main things that I'm seeing within my clients. The first, quite obviously, is anxiety. People are worried about the situation. You know, there's like a background anxiety. I think that gets compounded by having to work from home with children around, people are having to do homeschooling, other people working in the house. Some people are on their own, so they're lonely. That's been, like, anxiety is a big one. Relationships has come up very strongly. So people are on top of each other, and their closest relationships can be quite strained. And interestingly, another theme that I've been hearing is poor sleep. People finding it difficult to sleep, and having really vivid dreams. And I guess that's also associated with the anxiety. In terms of change, everything's different, you know, which is kind of where that's coming from, I guess. Working from home, different routines, different ways of having to get through the day. And people having to come up with new strategies to cope with that. And I think that's been really interesting. And that links in to the last part of your question, which is around spirituality. I'm seeing that people aren't having to commute. And a lot of the people that I work with are using that commute time to do things around self-development and to do things to help them deal with stress and the anxiety. Things like, you know, exercise regimes. People are doing more exercise, which I think is great. And mindfulness activities like yoga and meditation. A lot of people are meditating more. So I think we're seeing more sense of the spiritual opportunity of this, being more reflective, thinking about our place in the world. So yeah, I think it is having an impact in that space.
Oh, that's positive news. Now, David, you worked as an environmental specialist for a long time. What impact did the coronavirus have on the global environment? And what are some of the positive and negative aspects of the impact?
Yeah, so I've been working in the environmental field for 25 years. And I think the pandemic achieved in the space of a few weeks what we've been trying to do for years and years and years, you know. So that, I mean, you know, there's less cars on the road, there's less trucks, there's less aeroplanes in the sky, there's less shipping going on, there's less manufacturing. It's had a very, very marked impact on the environment. In China, they were reporting something like a 25% reduction in CO2 emissions during their period of lockdown. 50% reduction on nitrous oxides and the more toxic gases. You know, it's been a big impact. Water quality, waste, all been reduced. And I think that's been really interesting to see. Another positive is that the packages, the bailout packages that governments are coming up with are being focused towards climate change. So a good example, I think, is in Europe. So Europe, I think it's called the Next Generation Europe. They had something like $750 billion bailout package. 25% is focused on the environment. So there is that. It's stimulating investment. Having said that, there is a downside. The lockdown, the pandemic has provided a cover for things like deforestation in the Amazon. That's ratcheted up a notch. More poaching in Africa. And people not being able to meet has impacted the ability for green diplomacy, which is probably going to have a knock-on impact on investment in green energy. So there have been some downsides.
I got it. So since the outbreak, both Dr. Jane Goodall, the famous animal behaviorist, and Dr. Jae-chun Choi, a famous Korean ecologist, they've been providing hope through very positive messages. Do you think that human civilization can be transformed into a wiser ecological civilization as a result of the pandemic?
That's a really big question, and a very difficult one to answer. I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist. I think that some of the imagery that has come out of the pandemic, things like air quality over Delhi and Beijing, you know, the improvements, those before and afters. You've had like fish in the canals in Venice. You know, those kind of wild animals on the deserted streets of the city. Those kind of images are really, really powerful. And they've given additional impetus to the whole conversation about our space, our place within the natural world. And I think the pandemic is going to give that a big push in how that conversation continues. So I'm optimistic that it could see a major shift in the way that we interact with the environment. And it's needed, we need that.
That's
so good upside.
Yeah, that's good news. Okay. Now, due to the outbreak of the coronavirus, it looks as though the whole world is paying attention to the Green New Deal. The Korean government is also expressing considerable interest. Now, the two criticisms leveled at the Korean government's nuclear energy policy is that it wavers between idealism and a search for a practical alternative for future growth. Now, what is your viewpoint? How likely is it that the alternative energy industry will replace nuclear power plants as a future growth engine? And can you please tell us about the global energy policy trend and what the Singapore government has announced?
Yeah, sure. Okay. That's another really interesting question. So let's look at renewables. If you're looking from a global perspective, there has been, year-on-year increase in investment in renewables. Renewables, I think, now represent something like 28% of the energy supply for the world, which is, a huge improvement over the last, 20 years. It's increased probably about 1 to 1.5% just in the last 12 months. So renewables are very much gaining momentum, and that's, really good news. Still 60% or so is, fossil fuels, oil and gas and coal. So there's still some way to go. That is reducing. Now, nuclear is in that mix. Nuclear has been relatively stable. I think in the last year, it's seen a slight decrease. There are about 10 gigawatts of nuclear came off the market in the last 12 months, but about 5.5 were added. There were 5 new reactors came online. So it's still very much part of the mix. My view is that it probably needs to remain part of the mix because that 60% that we need to take up is huge. There are new technologies coming up, which I think we should keep keeping an eye on. There's something called the traveling wave reactor, which is a ultra-modern, ultra-safe reactor, which actually uses the waste that's coming out of traditional nuclear reactors, which of course is one of the main problems with nuclear. That's something to keep an eye on. So I think there's very much a place for nuclear as we go forward. It's clean energy. The Singapore government around the Green New Deal, Singapore, there's no hydro going on here. This is a small place. We don't have geothermal. There's no space for wind power. We don't have space for nuclear. But there is a growing investment in solar. Singapore government's policy is really, I think, about security of energy supply and efficiency of energy supply, particularly around transport and buildings and industry. That's kind of where Singapore sits amongst this, I think.
I see. Okay. Regarding Singapore's Green New Deal, are there any economic changes or stock market reactions towards it?
Yeah, there has been. Within the industry, there's something of a feeling that Singapore could be doing more around its greening of energy. Singapore's probably about 0.15% of global carbon emissions. It's very small. And I think the government senses that actually what they do isn't going to have a major impact on the global terms. They are investing in clean energy in terms of solar panels. They're installing solar panels in the housing estates. They're using the roofs for that. Also for public transportation is shifting towards electric. So there is investment in that space. But I don't get a sense that it's having a major impact in terms of the markets. It's kind of it kind of lacks ambition a little bit, and I think it's something that we might see some changes in the years ahead.
I see.
That make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay. Now, finally, are there any Green New Deal related industries and stocks in the Korean stock market that you're interested in and would like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, okay. Well, there is something I think is very interesting. I've been doing a lot of space in the since about 2013 in lithium-ion battery manufacturing. I was doing a lot of work on the safety in those manufacturing plants. And I've watched that industry just go nuts. The demand for batteries from, mobile phones and laptops, but particularly for the move towards electric vehicles is really fueling growth in that space. And in Korea, you've got a number of big players. Samsung SDI is big in this space. They've been doing really well. LG Chem is another one I think is well worth looking at. There's another interesting company called Kokam Company, which is a Korean company. About 2016, it got acquired by a company called Solar Edge, and it's listed on the NASDAQ, but they've been doing really well as well. So I think lithium-ion battery is something to keep an eye on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
David recommends 3 stocks: Samsung SDI, LG Chemical, and NASDAQ-listed Solar Edge. The reason why he recommends these stocks are because they are major lithium-ion makers. Lithium-ion makers are very important components for the electric vehicle industry. And for the past 5 years, there's been a huge boom. I want to thank everyone again for joining us on Korea Business News Global Signs. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you very much.